The candles were already lit when I walked through the door. 17 of them, tiny orange flames flickering on top of a cake that wasn't mine. My mother stood behind it, her phone raised to record, and my father had his arm wrapped around my little sister's shoulders, both of them grinning like the moment had been rehearsed. Nobody looked up when I came in. Nobody said, "There she is." The only sound in the kitchen was my mother's voice, soft and reverent, saying, "Make a wish, sweetheart." It was my birthday. I stood in the doorway with my backpack still on, my shoes still on, my coat still dripping from the rain outside, and I watched my 17th birthday cake get blown out by my 12-year-old sister. Nobody had done this on purpose, not exactly. That was the worst part. Nobody had sat down and decided, let's forget Emily's birthday again. It just happened. It happened every year, the same quiet erasure, like a tide pulling sand out from under my feet so slowly that by the time I noticed the ground was gone, it was too late to stand on anything solid. My name is Emily Cross. This is the story of the year I stopped waiting for my family to remember me and packed a bag instead. To understand why that cake felt like a knife, you have to understand what came before it. You have to understand Ruby. My sister Ruby was born when I was 5 years old, 3 months earlier than she was supposed to be, weighing barely 3 pounds, so small my mother said you could hold her whole body in 2 cupped hands like water. The doctors used the word miracle so many times that it stopped being a word and became her name. Not officially, but in every story my parents told at every dinner, to every relative, to every stranger who asked how many kids they had, Ruby was always our miracle. I was just the older one. I didn't understand jealousy at 5. I remember visiting the hospital, my mother crying with relief, my father unable to speak without his voice cracking, and me standing on a plastic chair trying to see over the incubator glass at this tiny red thing that had turned my parents into different people overnight. I thought it was beautiful. I thought we were lucky. I didn't know yet that luck, once it enters a house, doesn't always leave room for everyone. Ruby's birthday is 9 days after mine. When we were little, my parents used to combine our parties into one weekend, a compromise that felt fair when I was 7 and didn't yet notice that the balloons were always pink and purple, colors Ruby liked, never the blue and silver I asked for. By the time I was 10, the combined parties quietly became Ruby's party, with Emily's cake served at the end if there's time. By the time I was 14, there was no pretending anymore. My birthday became the warm-up act for the main event 9 days later, and somewhere in between the two had started blurring into each other, my day swallowed whole by hers. This particular year they hadn't even waited 9 days. They'd moved her celebration early, since the whole family's already gathering, my mother explained later, as if that sentence made any sense at all, as if my birthday and my sister's birthday were the same interchangeable thing you could shuffle around on a calendar without anyone noticing which name was missing. I didn't say anything that night. I put my backpack down. I sang happy birthday to my own sister on my own birthday, my voice thin and strange in my ears, and I ate a slice of cake with her name written on it in blue icing, and I went up to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and didn't cry because I had trained myself somewhere over the last 12 years not to. That was the night I started paying attention. Really paying attention, the way you do when you finally admit to yourself that something has been happening to you for a long time and you've just been too afraid to name it. I want to be fair to my parents because they weren't monsters. My father, Richard, worked long hours at a hardware supply company and came home tired most nights, but he never missed a school play, not mine, not Ruby's. My mother, Diane, kept a photo of me as a baby on her nightstand next to one of Ruby, and when I was sick she stayed up with me until 3 in the morning even though she had work in 5 hours. They loved me. I want that understood clearly, because this isn't a story about parents who hated their daughter. It's a story about parents who loved one daughter so loudly that the other one learned to whisper. The next few weeks I started noticing the small things I'd trained myself to overlook. The way my report cards got a nod and a good job, while Ruby's B+ in math got a celebration dinner because she'd worked so hard to catch up. The way my acceptance into the honors program at school got mentioned once at dinner and then dropped, while Ruby's spelling bee trophy sat on the mantel above the fireplace for 2 years. The way, when I asked my mother if we could go dress shopping for my school's winter formal, she said, "Can it wait until after Ruby's appointment? She's got her cardiology follow-up Thursday." Ruby had a heart murmur, a small one, something the doctors monitored but didn't worry about anymore. It had been years since it required any real concern. But in our house, Ruby's health remained a permanent excuse. A soft blanket my parents wrapped around every decision, every priority, every ounce of attention they had left to give. Nobody ever said it out loud, but the rule was understood. Ruby came first because Ruby had almost not existed at all, and the rest of us owed the universe a debt for letting her stay. I didn't hate Ruby. That's important too. She was 12, sweet in the oblivious way 12-year-olds are, always looking for me to braid her hair or help with her homework, always saying, watch this before doing some silly trick on her scooter in the driveway. She had no idea the weight she carried in our house, the invisible throne she'd been placed on since before she could talk. She was just a kid. I couldn't be angry at a kid for the shape a house built itself around. But I could be angry at the house. 3 weeks after the birthday that wasn't mine, I sat at the dinner table while my mother laid out the plans for Ruby's confirmation, a Catholic ceremony that was still 4 months away. She'd already booked a hall. She'd already ordered a dress. My father was nodding along, asking about the guest list, and I sat there pushing rice around my plate, waiting for someone to ask how my SAT prep was going, because the test was in 11 days and I hadn't told anyone how nervous I actually was. Can we talk about my test? I finally asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. My mother blinked like she was surfacing from somewhere underwater. What test, honey? The SAT. It's in 11 days. Oh, right, of course, she said, already turning back to my father. You'll do great, you always do. Rich, do you think Aunt Carol will come from Ohio for Ruby's confirmation, or is that too far for her? I put my fork down. I don't think anyone noticed. That night, lying in bed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old shoebox under my bed where I kept things I didn't know what to do with, ticket stubs, a bracelet from a friend who moved away, a folded piece of paper from 3rd grade with a drawing I'd made of our family. In the drawing, I was standing in the middle, my mother on one side, my father on the other, holding hands, a big yellow sun overhead. Ruby wasn't born yet. It was just us 3, and I remembered how safe that felt, how certain I had been that I belonged exactly at the center of something. I don't know exactly when I stopped believing that. Maybe it happened all at once, on the night of that birthday cake with someone else's name written on it. Or maybe it had been happening for 12 years, one quiet moment at a time, until it finally became too loud to ignore. I decided that night I was going to start keeping track. Not out of spite. Out of self-defense. I needed proof, even if only for myself, that what I was feeling wasn't imagined. I started a note on my phone. Nothing dramatic, just dates and small entries. March 4th, Ruby's parent-teacher night moved to same evening as my debate tournament. Mom went to Ruby's. April 9th, asked to borrow the car for college visit, told, maybe next month, because Ruby needed rides to gymnastics. April 22nd, my birthday is in 6 weeks. Ruby's Sweet 16 countdown poster already up in the hallway, even though she's turning 13. I wasn't trying to build a case against my family. I think somewhere underneath it I was trying to build a case for myself. Proof that I mattered enough to notice my own disappearance. It was around this time that I started talking to my grandmother, my father's mother, who we called Nana Joan. She lived 40 minutes away in a small house with a garden she was too stubborn to let anyone help her with, and every few weeks I'd take the bus out to see her, mostly because she was the only person in my life who asked me questions and actually waited for the answers. One Sunday in May, sitting on her porch with 2 glasses of lemonade sweating on the little table between us, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You've gotten quiet, Emmy. You used to talk my ear off." I didn't mean to tell her everything. It just came out slowly at first and then all at once, like something that had been dammed up for years finally cracking through. The birthday. The confirmation planning. The countdown poster with the wrong number of years on it that nobody had bothered to fix. The way I sometimes felt less like a daughter and more like a background character in someone else's story. Nana Joan listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started to worry I'd said too much, that she'd tell me I was being dramatic, that Ruby needed extra care and I should understand that. Instead, she said something I didn't expect. "Your parents love you very much, Emily. I need you to know that because what I'm about to say might make you doubt it, and it shouldn't." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, the way people hesitate when they're deciding whether a door once opened can ever be closed again. "There are things about Ruby's birth your parents never told you. Things I probably shouldn't tell you either, but I'm tired of watching you shrink in that house, and I think you deserve to understand why." I sat very still. What things? Before Ruby, your mother lost 2 babies, Nana Jones said quietly. One before you were born, one after. She never told you because it happened when you were too young to remember, and later I think the pain of it became something she just couldn't discuss, not even with your father, not for years. When she got pregnant with Ruby and things went wrong, when Ruby came early and the doctors weren't sure she'd survive that first week, your mother told me she made herself a promise. If this baby lived, she said she was never going to let a single day go by without treating it like the gift it was. She was terrified, Emily. Not because she loved Ruby more than you. Because she was certain in her bones that she was going to lose another child. And when she didn't, something in her broke in the opposite direction. She overcorrected. She's been overcorrecting for 12 years, and I don't think she even realizes she's doing it. I sat with that for a long moment, the ice in my lemonade melting, the porch swing creaking under Nana Jones' slow rocking. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy, and somewhere underneath the hurt, I did. But another part of me, the part that had spent 12 years quietly disappearing at the edges of my own family, felt something harder settle in my chest. That doesn't explain why they forgot my birthday, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. That doesn't explain the confirmation or the car or the tournament. Grief doesn't erase a person for 12 years, Nana. At some point that's not fear. That's just who they decided to become. Nana Joan reached over and took my hand, her skin thin and warm. You're right, she said simply. I'm not telling you this to excuse them. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to understand the why, even if the why isn't good enough. Understanding isn't the same as forgiving, Emmy. And it definitely isn't the same as staying quiet. I left her house that evening with my head spinning, the ground beneath me tilted in a new direction. For years I had believed that whatever gap sat between me and my parents was somehow my fault. That I hadn't been sick enough, hadn't been fragile enough, hadn't given them a reason big enough to be afraid for me. Now I understood there was history I'd never been told, wounds that had shaped the entire architecture of our house before I was old enough to notice the walls going up. But Nana Joan was right about something else too. Knowing the reason didn't make the 12 years of silence disappear. It just gave the silence a shape. I didn't say anything to my parents about what I'd learned. Not yet. I wasn't ready, and honestly I wasn't sure what I would even do with the truth if I said it out loud. Instead I kept my note going. I kept watching. And I started quietly to plan. The confirmation was in September. My birthday was in June. That gave me 3 months to decide what I actually wanted, because somewhere in the weeks after that conversation on Nana Jones' porch, a new thought had started forming, one I hadn't let myself think clearly before. Maybe the answer wasn't to fight harder for a seat at a table that had already been rearranged around someone else. Maybe the answer was to build my own table. I'd been accepted back in the spring into a summer program at a university 3 states away, a 6-week intensive for students interested in journalism, the field I'd quietly decided I wanted to pursue since freshman year. I hadn't told my parents I'd applied because I hadn't wanted to hear, "We'll see," turn into another quiet no. When the acceptance email came in April, I'd read it twice, then closed my laptop and told no one. Now, sitting with everything Nana Joan had told me, I opened that email again. The program started the week after my birthday. I want to be honest about something. This wasn't a story where the daughter runs away in the middle of the night with a duffel bag and a single note left on the kitchen counter. That's not what happened, even if the video title makes it sound that way. What happened was slower and in some ways harder. I told my parents about the program at dinner, 3 weeks before my birthday, the same week the confirmation planning had reached a fever pitch of guest lists and catering quotes. I chose dinner on purpose because dinner was the one place I knew I'd have their full attention, even if only for a few minutes. I got into a journalism program this summer, I said, cutting through whatever conversation had been happening about hall decorations. At State. It starts the week after my birthday. 6 weeks. I'd be living in the dorms. My mother set down her fork. You applied to something without telling us? I didn't think you'd notice either way, I said, and I watched the words land, watched my father's jaw tighten and my mother's face go still in a way I recognized, the look she got right before she decided whether to be hurt or defensive. That's not fair, Emily, she said. Isn't it? My voice didn't shake, which surprised me. You moved my birthday party to Ruby's party 3 months ago and nobody in this house noticed until I walked in and there were candles on a cake that wasn't mine. I asked about my SAT prep and you asked about Aunt Carol's flight. I've been trying to tell you things for months and every single time, there's always something else that matters more. The table went silent. Ruby, 12 years old and clearly uncomfortable, looked between us like she wanted to disappear into the floor. My father finally spoke, his voice low. That's not true. We love you both the same. I don't think you do, I said, and it wasn't cruel, it was just quiet, and quiet honesty I was learning, cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I don't think you mean to. I think something happened before I understood any of this, something that made you scared of losing Ruby in a way you were never scared of losing me. I found out about that a few weeks ago. And I get it, I really do. But knowing why doesn't fix 12 years of feeling like a guest in my own house. My mother's face changed then, the color draining from it. Who told you that? Does it matter? I said. It's true, isn't it? She didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was its own confession. My father cleared his throat, trying to steady the room. Emily, we can talk about this. We can fix this. You don't need to go away for 6 weeks to prove a point. This isn't about proving a point, I said, and for the first time in the conversation my voice cracked just slightly, just enough to let him hear how much this was costing me. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I just need to go somewhere I get to be the main character for once. I need 6 weeks where nobody forgets my name. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. Ruby, to her credit, was the one who finally broke the silence, her small voice shaking. I didn't know I was doing that to you, Em. I swear I didn't know. I know, I told her, and I meant it. This was never about you, Ruby. You didn't build this house. You just live in it too. I want to tell you that after that dinner, everything changed instantly, that my parents apologized and rearranged their entire understanding of our family overnight. That's not how real families work, and I think stories that pretend otherwise do a disservice to anyone actually living through something like this. What actually happened was messier and slower. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 days after that dinner, not out of cruelty, I understood later, but because she genuinely didn't know what to say. On the 3rd day she knocked on my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed, and she told me haltingly in a voice I'd rarely heard her use, about the 2 babies she'd lost before Ruby. About the 11 days in the NICU when Ruby weighed less than a bag of sugar and the doctors used words like, if she makes it instead of when. About how she'd promised God or the universe, or whatever version of hope she'd been clinging to in that hospital hallway, that she would never again take a single day of that child's life for granted. I didn't know I was taking your days for granted instead, she said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I watched my mother cry in front of me, not performing grief, not managing a moment, just breaking quietly at the edge of my bed. I let her cry. I didn't rush to comfort her the way I might have a year earlier because I was learning something important that spring. Something about the difference between forgiving someone and rescuing them from the consequences of what they'd done. I hugged her eventually. I told her I loved her because I did. But I also told her I was still going to the program. I need this, Mom, I said. Not because I don't love you and Dad. Because I need to know what it feels like to matter somewhere without having to compete for it. She nodded, and something in her face told me she understood, maybe for the first time, exactly how long I'd been carrying that feeling. My father took longer to come around, the way he always did with things that required him to say sorry out loud. He wasn't a man of big speeches. Instead, 2 weeks before I left, he came into my room one evening and sat down across from me with an old photo album I hadn't seen in years, one from before Ruby was born. He flipped through it slowly, pointing at pictures, a 5-year-old me on his shoulders at the county fair, a 7-year-old me holding a fishing rod twice my size, a 9-year-old me asleep on his chest during a long car ride. I forgot how much of you I had before Ruby, he said quietly. I don't think I ever stopped loving those years. I think I just got scared after everything with your mom, and I let that fear take up more space than it should have. I'm not going to pretend I understand everything you've been carrying him, but I see it now. And I'm sorry it took you leaving for me to look. My actual birthday, the one that had started this whole unraveling, fell 9 days before I left for the program. This time there was no confusion about whose day it was. My mother didn't mention Ruby's confirmation once. My father took the day off work, which he hadn't done for my birthday since I was maybe 10 years old. Ruby, in an act of quiet 12-year-old generosity that nearly undid me, gave up her own spot in the spotlight without being asked, insisting the cake say only my name, and sat beside me the whole party, glowing with the simple joy of watching someone else be celebrated for once. It wasn't a perfect day. There was an awkwardness underneath it, an unspoken acknowledgement from everyone in the room that this celebration existed partly to make up for 12 years of smaller ones. But it was mine, fully and completely mine, and when I blew out my candles, I made a wish I'd never let myself make before. I wished that whatever came next I would never again let myself become invisible in a room simply because it was easier than asking to be seen. I left for the program the following week with one suitcase and a heart that felt for the first time in longer than I could remember entirely my own. The 6 weeks that followed were not, in the end, really about journalism, though I did learn a great deal about writing and interviewing and the particular satisfaction of chasing down a story until it made sense. What I learned more than anything was what it felt like to exist somewhere without a shadow standing beside me, without a comparison waiting in the wings. I made friends who only knew me as Emily, not as the older sister, not as the one before the miracle. For 6 weeks I got to find out who that person actually was. My parents called every few days. Not out of obligation, I think, but out of something that felt new between us, an effort neither of them had made consistently before. My mother started a habit that summer that she kept up long after I came home. She called just to ask what I was working on, not to check up on me, just to listen. My father, during one call, told me he and Ruby had gone through the guest list for her confirmation and moved the date quietly so it no longer overlapped with the anniversary of the week I'd left. A small gesture that told me more than any apology could have. When I came home in August, the house felt different, not because anything about it had physically changed, but because I had. I walked in the door and my mother was in the kitchen, and this time when she looked up the first thing she said was my name. "Emily," she said, crossing the kitchen to hug me before I'd even set my bag down. "I missed you so much." Ruby's confirmation happened 3 weeks later and I stood beside her at the church, genuinely happy for her, no resentment simmering under my smile, because somewhere over that summer, the invisible scale I'd been carrying my whole life, the one that measured how much love was left over for me after Ruby's share had been taken, had finally been set down. I understood now that love in our house had never actually been a fixed amount split unevenly between 2 daughters. It had been fear, misdirected and badly managed for over a decade, dressed up as devotion. And fear, once it's finally named out loud, starts to lose its grip. The following spring, on my 18th birthday, there were no candles lit before I walked through the door. My mother waited for me on the porch, and when I stepped out of the car she was holding a small cake with exactly 18 candles, my name written across it in blue icing, my favorite color, the one nobody had bothered to remember for years. Ruby stood beside her, holding a sign she'd made herself, glitter glue and all, that read "Happy Birthday to the best sister in the world." No asterisk, no shared date, no countdown for someone else's celebration crowding the edges. I stood on that porch and let myself feel something I hadn't let myself feel in a very long time. The simple, uncomplicated relief of being remembered. I think about that shoebox sometimes, the one under my bed with the drawing from 3rd grade, the sun overhead, the 3 of us holding hands in the center of the page. I used to think that drawing represented something I'd lost when Ruby was born, some perfect family that had existed only before her, and I mourned it quietly for years without ever saying so out loud. I don't see it that way anymore. I think that drawing was never really about who stood at the center of the family. I think it was about a 5-year-old girl who believed without question that she belonged there. It took 12 years, a forgotten birthday cake, a summer 3 states away, and a lot of hard conversations to remind everyone in that house, myself included, that belonging was never something I needed to earn. It was something I'd always deserved.